But first, let's start with this. A non-governmental organization, Human Rights Watch, says an alarming 140 people have been killed since or in July by M23 rebels in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. In a recently released report, the organization says the killings took place despite ongoing peace efforts, including a United States brokered agreement as well as a Qatar-hosted negotiations between the DRC government and the rebels. For more on the Human Rights Watch report, we speak now to the organization's Central Africa Director, Lewis Mudge. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Piso, hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Let's first start, Lewis, with the report itself. What was the intention of the probe, and what were the major findings?
Well, I think it's important to highlight what you said was absolutely true. We documented over 140 killed. The United Nations, in the same massacres, has documented well over 300 killed. So I think it's very important to highlight that the number of people that we've documented and verified through our own methodology really seems to be scratching the surface. What we've established was that over a number of days in July into this month of August, Rwandan-backed M23 rebels carried out deliberate extrajudicial executions of civilians. These are including women and children. These are people who were rounded up and murdered by these M23 rebels. In some instances, Rwandan Defense Forces were there, not necessarily taking part in the murders themselves, but were on the scene because the M23 coordinates with Rwandan troops. So with regards to the peace deals that you just mentioned, one being brokered by the United States and one being brokered by Qatar, this is a very, very significant development, and it really is one that needs to be there needs to be strong language that's reflected as these deals continue to be negotiated and signed with regards to civilian protection and the prevention of atrocities like the ones we've just documented.
So we'll get to the peace talks in just a moment, but I want to reflect on the activity by M23 rebels, and I see the reports also mentioned that this was in conjunction with or allied with the FDLR, and we've heard the DRC government again accuse Rwanda of involvement in these killings. What were your findings in terms of the collaboration between the two and how these mass killings were carried out?
Sure, absolutely. You mentioned the FDLR. I think it's important just to clarify one point. M23 is an adversary of the FDLR. The FDLR is a group made up originally of people who carried out and perpetrated the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. And they very much have an anti-Tutsi and an anti-government of Rwanda agenda. And there are elements absolutely of the FDLR who are in Eastern Congo, especially in Rutshuru, this area north of Goma, controlled by M23, or at least under their zone of influence and under their zone of control. And there are certainly elements of FDLR in there. The FDLR is also a combatant of the Rwandan Democratic Forces, the RDF, and the Rwandan Defense Forces, the RDF. And the RDF is a direct supporter of the M23 militia, as well as the Rwandan government. And so when we talk about M23 fighting FDLR in these areas, and there was combat, when these killings occurred, there was combat between the FDLR and the M23. What we're really also talking about is the Rwandan Defense Forces fighting the FDLR. Now, the issue comes, and combat is combat, and we at Human Rights Watch, we apply international humanitarian law in a pretty strict sense of the word, and we understand that. The issue for us is that when the civilians, especially the women and children, but also there were dozens and dozens of men who were killed, men and boys. When the civilians are conflated to be FDLR sympathizers by the M23, by virtue of the fact that they exist in areas where the FDLR were once ruling, that's the issue for us. And that is what appears based on our research to have come to fore. So basically you have a whole group of civilians who are, by the definition, civilians. They are non-combatants. They are not taking place in this fighting. And when the M23 came into this zone and they made a decision clearly in July that because of their presence in this zone that was controlled by FDLR, the M23 decided they were going to kill hundreds of them. I mean, literally hundreds. And as someone who's been following the Eastern DRC for Human Rights Watch for 15 years, I have to tell you, these massacres even shocked me, even shocked me to the core.
I mean, the reason I raised the role of FDLR and the killings, including with those committed by M23, I did find it rather interesting, and as somebody who herself has followed the conflict in the Congo for about 20 years, I found that something that seemed a bit peculiar. So what happened in this case was M23 pursuing FDLR. So what exactly, how did they end up being part of the same mass killings? Was it purely coincidental because of the, as you say, the conflation of not only the civilians there, but also, let's face it, the number of rebel groups that have splintered over the decades and themselves who have been absorbed into each other, and being in antithesis of each other's agendas, but only to merge into the same agenda. That is a study in itself.
Absolutely. If you were to take North and South Kivu, and these are provinces by and large now controlled by M23, but if you were to take these two Congolese provinces, just those two, you would have well over 120 armed groups. It's an acronym soup. You've got, just dozens and dozens and dozens of these armed groups running around. And to your point, allegiances shifting. Sometimes the FDLR, and we have at Human Rights Watch have documented this. The FDLR is protected and sponsored by the Congolese government. And we have absolutely documented that in the past, and we've published it, and that has put us obviously at odds with the Congolese government. The FDLR, some of their leaders have warrants out by the International Criminal Court. The FDLR absolutely have committed atrocities, not only the leadership ranks back in 1994, but also towards civilians today in the Eastern DRC. What it appears to have been was a conflict between M23 and FDLR, and a decision was taken to deliberately, and this is based on many interviews that we've conducted, not only us, but also the United Nations, and Reuters did their own investigative piece on this as well. The M23 in July made a conscientious decision to also punish civilians who they think were aligned with the FDLR. And by punish, I mean execute and murder. And that is very, very, very serious in light of the fact that we're in an atmosphere in which both the M23 and Rwanda are, at least on the face of things, appearing to show that they're making good faith efforts to enter into peace deals.
So talk to me in a little bit more detail about what's been happening in the Rutshuru region, and if what we're seeing now is as a result of the resurgence of the conflict in 2021, or has it just been a systemic continuation of the conflict and the presence of the DRC government and Rwandan forces per se in Rutshuru? What can you tell us about it? What have you been able to map out?
Yeah, for anyone who's been following the region, I think this isn't the first time they've heard of M23. The first iteration of M23 launched itself back in 2011. So it's actually a number of years ago, 2011 into 2012. I myself was in Goma in late 2012 when the M23 actually took the city. So this is not the first time M23 has taken the city. Now, back then, back in 2012, there was a strong international pressure on President Kagame, because back then, just like now, basically M23 was a proxy force of Rwanda, and M23 pulled out. They only held the city for a matter of just over a week. Now they took the city in the beginning of the year. I mean, now we are months into this quote unquote administration by M23 in Goma. But this is look, if you were to take a 30,000-foot view as to why we're here continually now, why viewers in South Africa or across the world continue to hear about this just sort of intractable problems in the Eastern Congo. I think it's for a number of reasons, but primarily is a degree of corruption and nepotism in Kinshasa, amongst the ruling class in Kinshasa and the governments, that just make it completely unfeasible for the state to really present its presence in Eastern Congo. And also, you've got this foreign meddling by Rwanda, which has just been basically going on since Kagame first invaded South Kivu in 1996. Obviously, it ebbs and flows, and there's been hot points and lower points. But basically, Rwanda has had a hand with proxy militias in the eastern DRC since the mid-90s, just after the Rwandan genocide.
Mm. Now, the peace talks, the DRC government obviously is accusing Rwanda through its association, which of course Rwanda denies, with M23, of breaking the terms of that ceasefire agreement. What does this latest fighting mean? And also, has it stopped the mass killings in the region, or are we still seeing serious cases of attacks on civilians within the Eastern DRC?
I mean, it's very, listen, I think what you raised is a very, very important point. That second point you just raised, which is these killings by M23, which are terrible. There are other mass killings occurring. We just documented a week and a half ago killings to the north, up in the northern part of North Kivu, by a group called ADF, which is an ISIS-affiliated Islamist armed group. Not as high of numbers of people who've been killed, only in the 30s and 40s only. I say that fully acknowledging the irony of that statement. But no, there are ADF killings happening to the north. There's a group called Codeco, which is up in the Ituri province around Bunia, which is also carrying out killings against ethnic Bahema. So very much, unfortunately, no, there is not in any sense a degree of peace. And it's important to state that M23, whilst we're certainly hoping for a resolution to this conflict in the sense that it will protect civilians, this is not a panacea. If M23 retreats from Bukavu and Goma, the capitals of South Kivu and North Kivu respectively, that doesn't mean it's going to be everything is smooth sailing in the Eastern Congo. There's a lot of work to be done to neutralize the dozens and dozens and dozens of armed groups, which I had alluded to earlier, but also to address some of these larger systemic issues with this feasibility and the establishment of a Congolese state in these areas. So we're certainly not looking this through rose-tinted lenses and saying if M23 is taken care of, everything's going to be fine in the Congo, in the Eastern Congo. With regards to these peace deals, this is a unique moment for the Eastern Congo. Yes, Ukraine, yes, Gaza, they are sort of on the agenda of the world headlines. But in Washington, I'm an American, and I can tell you, in Washington right now, there's a lot of talk about a peace deal being brokered by the Trump administration between Rwanda and the DRC with regards to this conflict in the Eastern Congo. Now, much of that has to do with the fact that, as many folks know, there's a lot of minerals in this part of the world. And the Trump administration has not been shy at all in saying that their agenda is to try to open up trade to these minerals. I don't really have an opinion on that. If that leads to an actual decreasing of violence against civilians, then I think that could potentially be a very good thing. But with regards to these deals, the drafters of these deals in the world capitals, in Qatar, and in the United States, I think also need to have a very, very clear-eyed focus towards the abuses that are continuing to happen. And when I say continuing to happen, I mean, these abuses were happening right up until the beginning of August. So we're only talking about these things, unfolding a matter of weeks ago, and it would not be out of my realm of surprise to understand that they're going to be continuing.
Lewis, and I'm sure we'll continue our conversation sometime soon again, because a lot of uncovered ground there. Lewis Mudge, Human Rights Watch Central Africa Director, speaking to us about the mass killings in the Eastern DRC.